Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about AT teams. This is the week 4 lecture for SED 636 critical issues. The roadmap for tonight. First we're going to talk about teams versus groups. Next we're going to look at the development of AT teams, and then we'll also talk about some of the challenges, the successes, service delivery models of assistive technology teams. And I'm eager to hear some of your responses and your experiences, and if you're familiar with assistive technology teams. I'm going to be referencing the 2 resources that you had to read for this week: Assistive Technology Teams, Many Ways to Do It Well, written by Denise DeCoste, Penny Reed, and Maurice Kaplan. And the other reference will be our textbook, The Practical and Fun Guide to Assistive Technology. So throughout this lecture, I'm going to bouncing back and forth between the 2 because they both have different perspectives and add a lot of really interesting insight about assistive technology teams. The first thing I would like you to do in your blog is to write down if you have any familiarity with assistive technology teams, if you either have them in your district or have heard of them before besides in this class and besides your readings. After you've done that, we're going to go on and we're going to talk a little bit about the dynamic between a team and a group. In the DeCoste text, they talk a lot about the differences between teams and groups. So a team is essentially a group of people working towards a common goal. But she outlines specific changes that a group of people need to go through to move from being a group into becoming a team. They include changes in leadership, mission, and perception of the members and the way the interactions occur. What they then proceed to do is they have some bulleted points about a group of people that are not developing into a team and what that might look like. Next on your blog, I would like you to write a little bit about if you had ever been on a team and you didn't move into that team status, you remained a group. And what really happens and what are the implications for your group and your essential goal that you were supposed to accomplish. I know that when I taught in New Haven for a while, I was on a data team, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with those, and we really weren't a team. A lot of the characteristics that are listed under group, we had a lot of those in my team, quote unquote. We did have specific tasks or missions, and people would just kind of come and go. There definitely wasn't a consistent attendance, and we didn't also have consistent consensus on different issues or plans, and it would also often be a time where everyone would just kind of talk about problems instead of actually creating solutions. And it was really frustrating to be on that team and sit through that time when things weren't really getting done. It just created a wasted time, and people just got more frustrated rather than actually solving problems and doing what we were supposed to be doing. I am sure you've all had experiences like that, and what the important thing to do is what I'd like you to reflect on after your experiences is what can you do to kind of change that? How can you present to your team ways to make it function more like a team? Next that we're going to look at is we're going to look at the development of teams, and specifically we're going to talk about the research that was done on the DeCoste piece, AT teams and the ways to do it well. And the first thing I do want to point out is that this research was conducted, or this was published in 2007, and when you first start reading this, I don't know if anyone else picked up on this, but there is definitely a huge difference from 2007 and now, even just in terms of technology and the children that we service. This really came out, if you look on page 10, it lists the population served by AT teams. And you can see the number of respondents and then what they aligned their service to. And you can see that other disabilities listed were autism and mental retardation, or cognitive impairments as we would reference it now. And you see that no one responded to those particular areas. And if you imagine the field of assistive technology now, the autism population that's being serviced and benefiting from technology is skyrocketing. So it's just interesting to look back, and even though this research seems very current in 2007, in our field, it really can be outdated extremely quickly. So just to really think about that also, because we've been talking a lot about research, is how quickly things get outdated. And that's one of the reasons why there's not as much research in assistive technology, because things are changing so fast. So first let's talk about why assistive technology teams are developed. On page 51 of the Practical and Fun Guide, they have this resistance is futile paragraph first, and they talk about how assistive technology must be considered. It is the law, and school districts have to be prepared to address assistive technology needs and to be up and coming in the field because it's changing so much. And unfortunately, there's no law that mandates an assistive technology team to help districts make these considerations and get the awareness and the skills that their schools and teachers need in order to meet the legal requirements. In the research that Denise DeCoste and the other authors did, they asked assistive technology teams why they were developed. And the most commonly cited was for student needs and administrative initiatives. And having administrative backing is one of the most important aspects of assistive technology and effective implementation, especially in the classroom. In later weeks, when we talk about the role of administrators in assistive technology, you'll be listening to a webinar by Penny Reed, who is a co-author in this piece, and she really discusses the importance of administrators and how to empower your administrator to support assistive technology and how they really can affect the implementation in the classroom. And that's one of the most difficult parts, being on an AT team or being an AT specialist, is increasing that implementation in the classroom. And the role of administrators is huge in that. We'll talk more about that later, but it's really important to look at why teams were developed, and it was specifically because of those two main reasons. The Practical and Fun Guide also talks about the ripple effect, which I'm sure you've had conversation with colleagues in your school, where maybe you've talked about something that you've learned in class or something that you're really excited about, and that person then goes ahead and either implements it or tries doing it in their classroom. So you're really creating a ripple effect. And more than anything, an in-district assistive technology team can really help support that and build your building capacity for teachers to understand assistive technology and start implementing it more. The power of one discussion that the authors have on page 53 is also really important when you look at teachers being reluctant to implement assistive technology, either because they're unfamiliar with their software, they're scared to add something else on their plates. The importance of having that influence to give them the confidence in order to try it and then model to other teachers that it wasn't as difficult or it is easy to do, or even though it adds some more time in there, it really, the benefit for the child really pays off in the end. This goes back to the earlier chapters that we read. Assistive technology, the purpose isn't to make the teachers' lives easier. There's absolutely going to be a learning curve, and in the beginning, and it might overall make more work for the teacher, but the ultimate goal is to have a child have progress on their IEP goals and objectives, and that's one of the most important things that we need to keep in consideration when looking at implementing assistive technology. Yes, it's going to be more work, but at least you're taking away all of the strategies and all of the things that aren't working for the child and replacing it with something that is working, so that we're not just doing the same thing over and over and not getting the results that we need. When you think about it in that sense, that we're eliminating things that aren't working and providing things that are, we are being more efficient in the time that we're spending and making sure that what we are doing with the child is making progress. I really like the anecdote that the authors of the Practical and Fun Guide include about the schoolhouse thief. I'd love your reactions in your blog about that. Did you like that? And how would a resource like that benefit your school or your setting? And a lot of times, especially now with this new teacher evaluation, a lot is being focused on the negative, what's going wrong, and that's something that I really want you to think about when you're doing your classroom observations, and you'll read more about that later on in the book. But how important it is to emphasize the positive with teachers first, and looking at that. And a resource like this DVD of showing all of the different technology that teachers are using could really be invaluable for a class. Another important aspect of why develop an assistive technology team is really looking at the budgeting aspects. Although it seems like a very big financial jump to have an assistive technology team in your district, if you really start analyzing the effects on the team when you're looking at outside contracting for assistive technology services, it really could start paying off. There's a great description of that on page 66, where they look at an assistive technology. They have an image with adequate yearly progress and then looking at reducing cost and how the more technology a school district uses consistently and looking at assistive technology, which helps the child progress on their IEP goals and objectives, which is the goal is to increase their ability to access grade level content, which should hopefully then have them produce better on standardized tests. You can kind of see how that connection can be made. Most importantly, I think that the time aspect is one of the most important parts. Having a team that your teachers can quickly access to try and get some strategies that will be more effective and reduce that time that they have to spend in looking for different resources, trying out different things, and doing research themselves is really invaluable. And as all teachers and people in the education field, you understand how valuable time is. Having your own in-district process rather than finding someone else somewhere else can really cut down on time. The next is the how. How will assistive technology teams affect your school district? So once again, we're going to go back a little bit. On page 55 in your practical and fun guide, they really talk about how the assistive technology team can build up the capacity of your teachers and bringing them up level by level. There's a very nice visual there where it talks about steps and having your assistive technology team bring one teacher up each level, because we understand when you're looking at technology, at least high-tech technology, we understand that every teacher has a different baseline, has a different starting point and comfort with technology. The goal of the team is to bring every teacher in the district at least up one more level, increasing their confidence. Looking back on the DeCoste research, you can see that there is an emphasis on training. If you look on page 15, there is a percentage of time on service delivery chart, and she tracks how much time each team spends in the different character and the different categories of the teams where they spent most of their time. And in a lot of them, training is the emphasis and training is the biggest aspect, which is great to see for teams. Instead of really focusing on the evaluations, is increasing that capacity once again for the actual teachers. So that's really how we can see AT teams being successful, is empowering the teachers and the teams surrounding them to make appropriate assistive technology suggestions. And lastly, who should be on this team? And there's typically a feeling that it should be a multidisciplinary team. Ideally, you would like a speech and language pathologist, an occupational therapist, a teacher, and a physical therapist. And it's interesting that in Practical and Fun Guide, they really talk about not needing a multidisciplinary team. So I'd like you to talk in your blog a little bit, reflect on that. Do you agree with their perspective or do you disagree? For me, I'm kind of on the fence. I think empowering people and having particular characteristics in a person to have them reach outside their expertise and do some more research to broaden everyone's knowledge base is I think a great thing, but it's not always the most time effective. I know that at ACES, I have the special ed background and my partner has a speech and language background. And sometimes I do have some cases that are speech and language, and I try and cooperate and collaborate with her much more on those, but it does take a lot more time. And considering our caseloads are so heavy, for us it's not the best model, even though I am building up a lot of my information and my knowledge, which I really like. It's just a lot more difficult for me to do something like that. So depending on the model, it can work really great. If you have your weekly meetings and you can talk with everybody and share knowledge, in a perfect world, that would be awesome. In the DeCoste research, they talk a lot about how the division of teams are mostly special educators. And rarely, I think physical therapists were the lowest on the teams. And so I think that's a really interesting thing to look back on and see, and then how important it is to use the child's individual team members when you're doing an evaluation. And that's really what the Practical and Fun Guide talks about, is having an individual from the AT team come and work with the child's team. And there should be a representative from all of those areas on the child's team if it's relevant to their needs. What I do find really interesting is in the Practical and Fun Guide, they provide a list of characteristics for a good AT team member. And if you notice, the last characteristic listed is knowledge of assistive technology. So I'd like you to write in your blogs how you feel about this characterization list. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there anything that you would add? I know they talk a little bit about why assistive technology is last on their list, but I'd just love to hear your comments on this, and I'll respond back on your blogs before I give my opinion. But I'm eager to see how you feel about their characteristics list, if you agree or if you add something else on there. Next, we're going to talk about the challenges that confront an assistive technology team. First, we're going to talk about is the equipment. And there was a lot of some interesting anecdotes in the Practical and Fun Guide talking about engraving and making sure that you have a full log of all of your equipment, which is extremely important. And if you are interested in, starting an assistive technology team or even being on a committee, I highly encourage you to start off with an inventory. Even if you can get maybe a grant from your district to do it yourself and to go into schools and to look at the software, because that's number one. Anytime I go into a district or I get a referral, and I started off with my job at ACES asking supervisors for lists of assistive technology that they have available in their district. Because oftentimes, if it's available, you might be able to find a good use for it instead of having the district buy another copy. I went to a session at a conference that I went to last week, and they talked about how a great implementation plan could make bad assistive technology work, but a bad implementation plan can make great assistive technology not work. So it's really interesting to think about that. And if you have technology in your district available, why not give it a shot first before asking to buy something else? So I really liked the anecdote in the book about engraving and kind of really thinking about that. But if you do have a team, you need to think of a good way to keep track of all of your technology and especially keep track of some of your software codes. So you might get some free copies of some software or make contact with different sales representatives, and that's really important to keep a list of also. Teacher buy-in is one of the biggest challenges for assistive technology teams, because you are asking teachers to take a risk and to take on some more work in learning new technology and implementing something different. And I know we talked earlier in this class about the ripple effect and having one teacher buy in and hopefully affecting the others, but it really is a huge challenge. So finding your own unique way to really empower teachers to use technology and to buy into this change is really essential. What we're going to talk a little bit about in the implementation classes farther on is how to help teachers with assistive technology implementation plans and developing something that's quick for them to access in order to make sure that they buy into the plan and they actually use the technology. The next aspect is looking at the effectiveness of the team and really tracking how the team is improving the district. Since there really is no standardized test scores, which our districts love to evaluate us by, it sometimes might be difficult to really prove that the team is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. There is a chart, an impact chart on page 105 in the Practical and Fun Guide, which is really nice and kind of gives some good ideas if you're proposing to your district about having an internal AT team, is really tracking. What you want to look for is really a decrease in assistive technology evaluations, because you want to be able to build that capacity of your teachers to maybe problem solve themselves first. In my other classes, they're assigned to do research on their district's assistive technology policy, and I think it was Winston Public Schools their policy is actually to have an assistive technology consultation first to see if there was anything that the team could do informally to try and get some positive results before a full evaluation is done. And they talk a little bit about that in the Practical and Fun Guide also. And it's a really nice thing to really think about. So that would be your team being effective, is empowering the child's individual team to make decisions and find technology by themselves instead of requesting the full evaluation from the specialist. And lastly, one of the biggest issues in assistive technology is looking at the funding for the team. Hopefully you're having administrative blessing when you're creating your team anyways, so you'll have maybe a particular budget, or you're just working within the confines of the district's assistive technology. But funding is one of the most difficult parts, and really looking at how can you then conserve money if your team is able to decrease the amount of evaluations. Maybe your district isn't paying as much to outside contractors, so then you can spend some more money on some assistive technology tools, maybe in your loan bank or some resources to provide for teachers. But funding is always an issue. So if you can prove that your team is effective, then maybe you will have some more funding sources so that you won't really have to worry about proving too much to your district that you should get more funding. In the Practical and Fun Guide, they talk a lot about creating a team slogan and a logo or a mascot. So what I would like you to do, in addition to any of the responses during the lecture, is I want you to just create an AT team slogan and either create a logo or a mascot. You can just Google search and image it, or if you want to, be really creative and create your own. But it's really something to just get the passion back. I am extremely passionate about assistive technology, and it really sometimes is difficult for me to really invigorate or to fire up some other teachers. And I really liked this concept because I think it really makes it fun, and it gives someone something to follow through and to really follow, which I like. And what I also want to talk a little bit about is the importance of metaphors and anecdotes that are included. You can see even in the DeCoste article, they have metaphors to assistive technology teams and a flock of geese, and how the way that the flock of geese forms and how assistive technology teams form, and some of the important principles around that. So what I would like you to blog about is what is the importance and the value of all of these metaphors and anecdotes that we keep reading about in these resources that I'm assigning to you, and how can you then use them to help spread awareness for assistive technology. Lastly, in regards to success, the DeCoste research, they have in the appendix the self-assessment for AT teams. I'd like you to take a look at that and blog in your lecture blog about the importance of this and why it's so valuable for assistive technology teams. And it's even something that you could even bring to your administrator without a team to say, hey, let's kind of look at this and see if we can create something to help self-evaluate your district in general. But why do you think something like that would be so valuable? Lastly, I want to talk about the models of service delivery. So there was a lot of discussion about the two different types of service delivery. You have the expert model versus the capacity building. And what the expert model is what a lot of our models in Connecticut is that an expert assistive technology specialist will come in, do an evaluation, provide a report, and provide recommendations for a team, versus the capacity building model, where an expert can come in and really just consults with the team, leads the team through the evaluation, and the team, the students' team, actually then creates recommendations based on those consultations. And that's really what Connecticut essentially is missing. Most of the Connecticut model, or at least in our area, looking at ACEs, we have the expert model rather than the capacity building model. So what I would like you to blog about is how we could really start to change that culture. For me, I'm very passionate about the capacity building model. I think it's really the way that Connecticut should start looking towards, and I've tried to set up specific assistive technology teams or committees in each of the districts that I've worked in, and unfortunately I wasn't very successful. So now I'm on the other end of the expert model, at ACES, but I'm trying to really change how our process at ACES and how we do things to make us more towards capacity building rather than this strict expert model. But what I would like you to do is in your blog talk about how we really could start changing the culture in Connecticut to move more towards capacity building. Or do you even think we should change it? Maybe you believe that the expert model is the best way to go for us right now, and that's totally fine. But blog about that, why it's so important. What I would also like you to do is both of the different resources described various characteristics of the teams. And what I would like you to do is blog about which are the most important characteristics of assistive technology team and why. Maybe were the characteristics that you find the most important not included? Did you not identify with either of the resources? Or was there one resource that really kind of gave you a characteristic that you find is the most important in a team? So just include that in your blog, please. And that really wraps up our lecture on assistive technology teams. Please, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in your blog, and I will respond back to you on your blog on Blackboard 9. And once again, kind of give some feedback on how the online lecture worked. If you have any suggestions, I tried to do a little bit more annotation today, but I'm looking forward to reading your blogs, and I hope everyone has a great week.